Good evening. We have amazing economic data from this week. It is Friday. What is today? Today is January 26th. It's Australia Day. Happy Australia Day. The S&P 500 had 5 consecutive record-breaking days. They had a 6-day winning streak. It ended today. The S&P 500 ended its record-breaking streak. It ended the 6-day streak, but for 5 consecutive days, it consistently hit new highs. Why does that matter? Well, what is a bull market, right? We often hear the term, we're in a bull market or we're in a bear market. What is a bull market? A bull market has two definitions, or two commonly accepted, hallmarks, right? One is that a bull market takes place when stocks are up 20% over their previous, most recent lows. Now, that happened in June of 2023. So the most recent low that the S&P 500 hit was in October of 2022. And by June of 2023, it was up by 20% from its most recent low. And so, based on that, one of the two definitions of a bull market was met. But the other definition of a bull market is that hitting new highs, when a stock index hits new highs. And that happened this week. That happened with gusto this week, where the S&P 500 not only hit new highs, but for 5 days in a row, it kept ping, 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 hitting bigger and bigger highs. So we can now very definitively, by both definitions of the word, very definitively state that we are in a bull market. So that's the major economic news from this week. The economy, we have some data now from December. Typically, there's a lag time of about a month as data is gathered and processed. Here's what we know from December of last year to give us some indicators, again, of how the economy is doing. We know that the economy grew 3.3% in the last quarter, in the final 3 months of 2023. Now, that's down from what it did in the fall, because in the previous quarter it grew 4.9%. But the fact that we have this combination, the trifecta of strong growth, low unemployment, and low inflation, and we're going to talk about both of those in a moment, that is an incredibly unusual combination. You historically, typically, have to sacrifice one for the other. Historically, you typically get higher or increased unemployment when you're bringing inflation down. And the reason for that is because the way to bring inflation down is to cool off the economy, right? You make the cost of capital more expensive. When that happens, businesses don't borrow money to grow, which means they can't hire, they can't grow, they can't hire more employees. So the fact that we are in this incredibly unusual position where we are reducing inflation while simultaneously not maintaining record low unemployment. Unemployment is at a 50-year low. And unemployment has been below 4% for 23 consecutive months. So it's an incredibly unusual position that we're in. Now, let's talk about inflation for a moment. The personal consumption expenditures, which is one measure of inflation, rose 2.6% in December as opposed to the previous December. That's a measure of generally what households spend. But there's a different measure of inflation. It's called core inflation. Core inflation is that same measure, but it strips away two variables. It strips away food and fuel, right? Groceries and gas. Now you might be asking yourself, why? Because that's a big chunk of our budget. But groceries and gas, food and fuel, are both highly impacted by price shocks that don't necessarily reflect inflation. So, for example, if there is a severe weather event in a major food producing region, or if there's a war in a major food producing region, those types of things can impact food and fuel in the short term. So core inflation is essentially inflation minus food and fuel. If we look at that number, it paints a slightly worse story. It climbed 2.9% in December, as opposed to 2.6 if we look at inflation overall. Now, what's notable is that the Fed's target for inflation is 2%, right? So the fact that we have just cited 2.6 and 2.9 as our numbers, right? The fact that we are in the twos, granted we're in the mid to high twos, but the fact that we're in the twos when the Fed is aiming for 2% paints a we're almost at the finish line picture. But let's not celebrate too early. A little bit of history here. In 2022, inflation peaked at 7%. But if you'll recall, in early 2022, the Fed's benchmark overnight interest rate, which is the rate at which the Fed loans money to banks, that benchmark overnight interest rate in early 2022 was near 0%. These days, it hovers somewhere between 5.25 to 5.5%. So the reason that if you go to apply for a mortgage, it's going to cost you around 7% is because the bank is borrowing it from the Fed at around 5.25 to 5.5%. So then they add a little extra. Boom, you've got a mortgage at 7%, 7.2, 7.3 right now is typically what people with great credit can get on a 30-year fixed. So the Fed, since March of 2022, has raised interest rates 11 times. That's what got us from near zero to 5.5 to where we are today. And again, at the time that they began raising interest rates, inflation was at its peak at 7%. We are now down to the twos, and that bodes well. So what's going to happen next? The Fed is meeting next week. The Fed is meeting January 30 through 31st. And it is highly unlikely that they are going to reduce interest rates during that meeting. That is based not just on what analysts say, but also many Fed governors have also kind of, not that they can tell us what's going to happen, but that's what they've hinted at. There is, however, a statement from the president of the Federal Reserve of Cleveland who said, and this actually is quite telling, she said that March is probably too early for a rate cut. Now, the Fed is meeting January 30, 31st. That's their next meeting. After that, they're going to meet in March. And then after that, their next meeting is scheduled for April 30th and May 1st, right? So January, March, and then that border of April and May. Those are the next three meetings. January, they're highly unlikely to raise interest rates. March, according to the president of the Federal Reserve of Cleveland, and granted, that's just one voice out of many, but according to her, March is probably too early for a rate cut. So it looks as though, at least there's evidence to suggest that we might not see interest rates getting cut until possibly the border of April and May, right? When April leads into May, that might be when rates start to get cut. Now, the Fed has kind of a delicate balance that they want to walk because if they keep interest rates too high for too long, they risk cooling the economy more than necessary. But conversely, if they start lowering interest rates too early, or if they lower too often or by too much, then they risk celebrating a premature victory and not taming inflation properly. And that can cause even bigger damage down the road. My guess is that given how strong the economy is right now, given the fact that we have such strong growth and such like I said, unemployment is below 4% for 23 consecutive months. That is historically lower than it's been in about 50 years. Given the fact that the economy is so strong, my guess is the Fed is not worried about cooling the economy more than necessary. And that probably is a big part of what's playing into the hints that they might keep interest rates where they are through April, May. Now, that being said, Bankrate forecasts that mortgage interest rates will drop below 6% by the end of this year, 12 months from now. So there is, and I've heard this actually from a lot of investors and market watchers, not Market Watch, but not official Market Watch, but market watchers, people who watch the market. You know, I've heard a lot of speculation that people think that interest rates probably over the span of the year might get reduced by around 150 basis points, that's 1.5 percentage points. Of course, there's no way to know that. Of course, it's premature. Of course, we're just making guesses. But a lot of speculation kind of points to that. And bank rates forecast that mortgage rates would drop below 6% this year is really in line with that because, as I said, mortgage interest rates right now are at around 7.2, 7.3%. So, what does that mean for you? Well, here's what we know. This, particularly, I'm going to kind of turn and talk about housing. We know that existing homes, well, existing homes, right? Homes that are not brand new, homes that somebody else has already lived in, at least one other person has already lived in. Existing homes are typically 90% of home sales. They are by and large the bulk of home sales, right? In 2023, the sale of existing homes fell to its lowest level in 30 years. Um, it's likely that as interest rates drop, the lock-in effect that is experienced by current homeowners, right, where the current homeowners are disincentivized from selling their home if they are trading in a 3% or 3.5% mortgage interest rate for a 7.5% mortgage interest rate, right? So when mortgage interest rate eventually, when they fall to about 6%, which could be by the end of the year, could be next year, but when they fall to about 6%, 80% of people, of existing homeowners who have mortgages, will still be locked in because 80% of existing mortgages are sub 6%. But that does free up the 20% that are above that. Not to mention all of the homeowners, around 40% of homeowners own their homes free and clear, right? And predominantly baby boomers. So there's a chance that more inventory, more housing inventory may come to the market as interest rates decline and, existing homeowners no longer have that lock-in effect. That being said, the same is also true, that's the supply side. The same is also true on the demand side. There's also a lot of pent-up demand. And we are having the unfortunate situation where not only are mortgage interest rates at a 22-year high, but the median home price also hit a record high. So median home prices are at a record high, and that's because of not much supply, right? Median home prices are at a record high, and interest rates are at a record high. And that combines to create a reduction in demand, which is why home buying fell to its lowest point in 30 years. And so some of that pent up demand will probably enter the markets at the end of the year as interest rates drop, probably matching or likely exceeding any new supply that comes onto the market. So likely, I hate to be the one who says this, the bearer of bad news, but likely home prices are going to continue to climb because we just don't have enough supply to meet demand. More people want homes than homes exist. So, so that's the data on the home front. What else is going on? So there is a little bit of bad news. I know I've painted a very optimistic picture in everything that I've said so far, but let's talk about a few of the negative indicators that are out there. New filings for unemployment did tick up a little bit last week. Again, that's last week, so it's just a short-term blip or a short-term tick, but it's something to continue watching. Debt balances on credit cards, as well as loan balances on buy now, pay later programs, such as Klarna, or other buy now, pay later offerings that you'll see on online purchases, both of those have also ticked up. And so what that means is consumer spending, particularly consumer discretionary spending, which is what buy now, pay later supports, is high. Now, that's actually kind of mixed news. On one hand, it means that people feel confident enough to spend on discretionary items. On the other hand, it means that they are floating that with debt. And so if we were to have some type of increase in unemployment, or if we were to have some type of an economic hiccup, it puts households in a more precarious situation. So those are the two negative indicators that are out there that we'll keep watching. I mentioned stocks and the S&P 500 in particular has hit 5 consecutive days of new highs. There are 11.4 trillion trillion with a T dollars in funds that are benchmarked to the S&P 500. So the fact that this index, which tracks 500 companies representing 503 stocks in the market, the fact that this index has hit record highs for 5 days in a row, that translates to significant money for pensions, for 401ks, for ordinary working middle class Americans who have their 401k or 403b money in an S&P 500 index fund. So a lot of this is fueling some consumer confidence. And the University of Michigan, which tracks the consumer expenditure, which tracks consumer confidence, they have reported that consumer confidence right now is at its highest point since July of 2021. So that is the latest on the economic front. Thank you. Thank you so much for joining. Say hello to everybody who's here live. Hi, Julio. Hi, Jonathan. Hi, Jim. Jonathan says, longtime listener, first time chatter. Thank you. Thank you for coming. Thank you for watching. Thank you for spending your Friday night here with me, getting an update on the economy. This is our Friday installment of the latest economic news. I'm going to be back here on YouTube every Friday with an update on what's happened in the economy this week. So thank you so much for coming. Thank you for joining live. Have a great Friday night. And if for those of you who are watching this afterwards, have a great whatever time of day and week this is for you. And I will catch you here on YouTube. All right. Have a good night.